Hello, my name is Stephen Denman. My organisation is Shining Guidance and my website is shiningguidance.com. I'm going to talk to you today about individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions and how they have interactions and their relationships that can prove to be very beneficial both psychologically and emotionally for their mental health with animals, predominantly birds or mammals, but obviously with household pets, it would mainly be with felines or canines or both. Now, we know from all the research that's been done over the past 40 to 50 years that individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions do prefer to have interactions with animals over human beings, as they find human beings, or Homo sapiens as they can be called here on planet, to be too emotionally complex, too threatening or challenging in some way to their own fixated routines, fixated and highly rigid beliefs and habits, and therefore they tend to want to create social avoidance around such people. We know that 80% of children with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions have participated both consciously and unconsciously, both individually and socially in small groups, in animal welfare therapy that has improved their psychological and emotional mental health. Hence, household pets such as felines or canines or both can be proven, therefore, to be highly beneficial on a psychological and emotional level to the overall mental health of individuals, not just children, but also adolescents and adults with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions. We know the biophilia theory, which is a set of principles that is defined as the innate tendency of any human being on planet Earth to unconsciously and quite repeatedly seek out connections with the natural world, which is comprised of both aquatic ecosystems and land-based ecosystems, and therefore the different species of life forms that exist within those ecosystems. Because we have to remember human beings have an innate affection, fascination, and interest in the natural world, which is comprised of those, aquatic ecosystems and land-based ecosystems, and they find it very interesting. And therefore, it's a way of spiritually reconnecting on some level to do with things that they would remember through, shall we say, in previous incarnations, going back many aeons into prehistory. So those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, just like many individuals who are neurotypical, have an unconscious desire to have a direct relationship with the natural world, and obviously therefore the aquatic ecosystems or the land-based ecosystems or both, and therefore the different kinds of life forms that exist. We can go back 7,500 years to the time, in ancient Sumer in the Middle East and the Fertile Crescent, when the first animals started to be domesticated, which was a labour of tremendous love, took a lot of effort, organisation and affection, dedication to truly develop over many generations. That then became really an expression of animal husbandry. Really, it was in what's now really classed as prehistoric farming or early farming. So in these same academic studies going back over the past 40 to 50 years, the connections that have been made between humans and canines, just based on observing behavioural patterns to do with eye contact, and when a human's eyes make contact with the eyes of a canine, what is noticed is there is a specific increase in serotonin in both the human and the canine. So there's obviously a somewhat profound biological and physiological connection between domesticated animals, not just canines, but obviously all the other kinds of domesticated animals. And so the emphasis on developing relationships with domesticated animals becomes a psychological feedback loop. Just for example, just in the fact that there's that eye contact issue that increases serotonin levels. So this kind of connection is very important for those individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, because for them it's a way of social avoidance if they can just focus on developing their love and affection towards birds or mammals or both, or other types of animals, and that's an escapism for them. They don't have to challenge their rigid and fixated beliefs and their routines and habits. Because being a human being is a real challenge, regardless of whether you're neurotypical or you're an individual with autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions.
And so, it's a way of relaxing. It creates a sense of therapeutic bliss and joyfulness if you've got a furry feline, a furry canine on your lap and keeping warm. And it's almost like a form of pet-based meditation, really. So, although individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions often avoid eye contact with other human beings, they are unconsciously aware that eye contact is one of the three focal points that they must consider when interacting with birds or mammals or both. So, again, from all the available research that's been taking place in the past 40 to 50 years, we have to understand that the direct social cues that humans tend to give each other unconsciously are not always picked up on directly, immediately, or at all by individuals who have various kinds of autism spectrum disorder ASD conditions, which can possibly include those individuals who've got Aspergers syndrome, or those individuals who have perhaps obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD traits. So we know it's a very big issue for all of them. They find it very difficult. And so animal ownership amongst individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions is a very beneficial and helpful thing, for them to do. And it's a way of relaxing and retreating from having to worry about being lonely or being isolated, because they've got a animal companion. They've got that friendship and companionship they can rely on and turn to. That can help with their mental health. It may help them if they've got clinical depression or major depressive disorder, MDD type conditions, and so on. So, we know overall, regardless of whether it's an individual with autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions, or an individual who's neurotypical, that animal ownership is very beneficial to the psychological and emotional mental health of any human being or Homo sapien here on planet Earth, in this condensed vibratory expanse that we define as a 3D holographic reality of the material dimension. And life is very complex when you're a human and when you choose to come here. And those individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, they find it specifically and intensely challenging almost all of the time during every waking moment of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year of their lives on planet Earth. So anything that can alleviate that without them having to directly challenge their own fixated routines and belief systems is going to be beneficial. And so, the concept that's always been put out there concerning individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions is that they have the inability to express emotional complexity and emotional connectivity. Well, this has been proven to be completely incorrect, completely wrong, and completely unfounded on a scientific level. So the research that's been done is obviously flawed, because what is now known is, on all these studies over the last 40 to 50 years concerning individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions, is that they are able to express very direct and very intimate levels of affection and love towards felines or canines or both, or other kinds of animals that they may have as household pets. And perhaps the way they do it isn't exactly the same as neurotypical individuals, but that right research, that scientific endeavor that was put out there, obviously was completely wrong. So, in fact, the majority of individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, which can include those individuals with Aspergers syndrome or perhaps individuals with obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD traits, is they tend to actually be more empathic, more compassionate, more sensitive on emotional level. The difference is that the way they express it's perhaps different because of the way neurologically the way they think is different. Their cognitive processes tend to be different. That's all it is. But actually they're far more emotionally sensitive, far more tuned in, far more empathic, and probably far more intuitive as well. Now, I want to go on to talk about two specific individuals who've done incredible amounts of scientific research that's completely valid into the connections between those individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions, and the idea of animal welfare, animal husbandry, and actually the idea of just having a household pet like a feline or a canine or some other type of animal. And the first of these individuals is Dr. Gray Atherton, and she's done vast amounts of research into this area and looking at the social impetus that takes place for an individual once they start to take on the role of being a pet owner. And her work is really quite profound in showing that for autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions, amongst individuals that are displaying such traits or characteristics, there tends to be a lessening or a reduced intensity in those traits or characteristics, especially to do with aggression based issues, a sense of panic or anxiousness or worry they may have been feeling tends to massively diminish when they're in the presence of a pet canine, or some other kind of animal. It's really very beneficial for those individuals to have household pets as a form of really animal based healing, and it's in a way a natural world based form of counselling, self counselling that's taking place for those individuals. Now, we know from the research that Dr. Gray Atherton has done that it's gone on to become very helpful in regards to doing the counselling for various individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions. Now, we have to remember that Dr. Gray Atherton has a Bachelor of Science degree in Child Development from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. She also has a master's degree in counseling from the University of Houston in Texas. She also has a doctorate in educational psychology and individual differences from the University of Houston as well. She has previously lectured at that university and the University of Wolverhampton over a long period here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And Dr. Gray Atherton has also been a counsellor, and she has really done a lot of research and work into supporting the mental health of adolescents with neurodevelopmental conditions. And she is predominantly interested in understanding and discerning further how individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions, perceive their social environs in reference to how they're interacting with, animals, and that can be either birds or mammals or both. It can be a canine, it can be some other kind of animal that is a household pet. So we know that she has done leaps and bounds research that's proving to be highly beneficial for various charitable organisations that are providing support networks for those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions. Now, the other individual I want to discuss is Dr. Gretchen Carlisle. She is a research fellow with the Research Centre for Human-Animal Interaction at the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine. Now, she specifically has studied for many, many years children with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, in reference to how they interact and have companionship and relationships with felines and canines or other kinds of household pets. She's also looked at general studies on a wider level with birds and mammals, and she really specifically focuses her research down to looking at the unconditional love and affection, or the non-judgmental love and affection and the companionship that arises from that relationship among those children with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, and how they're interacting with felines or canines or both in a household setting. So we have to remember these two individuals, Dr. Gray Atherton and all of her work, and Dr. Gretchen Carlisle and all of her work, has been absolutely invaluable in really getting a greater insight into the psychological and emotional benefits that can arise for individuals of autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions when it comes to them having household pets, and also the views that those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, who may be individuals that have Aspergers Syndrome, or perhaps they may have Obsessive Compulsive Disorder or OCD traits and characteristics, and how those individuals really can improve their lives through actually building on and developing relationships with animals, and then taking it from that level to start building their social interaction skills with other human beings. That's a very important thing for them to do. So I think this information I've given you, I would say, is really covered everything that I wanted to discuss. You can give out statistics all day and go into much more detail, but I feel that it then gets to the point where you're giving too much academic research and you're not focusing enough just on the issue itself. what we really must understand is individuals that have, autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, who may well have aspects of Aspergers syndrome, or they may have aspects of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, are individuals that on one level or another, if they're not being psychologically and emotionally supported, are literally crying out for help, regardless of whether they're actually physically doing that by phoning someone or emailing someone, or they're going and using Microsoft Teams, or they're using Zoom or Facebook Messenger rooms or any other of these social media platforms. They are in need of help, and the fact that those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions tend to be far more empathic, far kinder, far more emotionally sensitive than neurotypical individuals. But because of the way they are neurologically structured and the way they think their cognitive processes, they tend to be overlooked by many people, because it's like those individuals who are neurotypical can't see that. And when it comes obviously to animal welfare, having a level of affection and kindness towards a feline or a canine or another household pet, or just birds or mammals or both in general, those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions tend to be, again, overlooked. It's like there's not a lot of people out there, unless they're fully trained as behavioral psychologists or clinical psychologists, or counselors or psychotherapists. A lot of them are not going to be able to quickly pick up on the body language, the gestures, the facial expressions, and the eye movements of those individuals with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions when it comes to their interactions with birds or mammals or both. So, it's sad in many ways that so many people don't see that. And we know from these studies that I've been mentioning over the past 40 to 50 years that, around 6 out of 10 families that own a feline or a canine, for example, have shown that 94%, or more than 9 out of 10 of those families I've just mentioned that have children with autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, display a persistent and very intense bond of love and trust and joy in actually being with those household pets, as opposed to neurotypical children, when it tends to be much more around 72% to maybe 75% or so thereabouts. So we're looking at a very unique set of people. And so we should celebrate individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, because they're truly amazing. They just need to be given far more recognition. And especially in the Western world, where everything is geared towards money and consumer spending and, getting a mortgage and having a big house and accumulating lots of material objects and so forth. What we need to understand is, out there is the scientific know-how that can be applicated when it comes to individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions, as being those individuals that are the pathfinders. They are the literal indicators of a new way forward psychologically and emotionally when it comes to animal welfare. So by studying their interactions and how they show kindness and empathy towards birds or mammals or both, and that can be in a natural setting in the natural world, say, for example, in an aquatic ecosystem or a land-based ecosystem, or with a pet canine, any other, pet animal within a household setting. Those individuals are expressing a level of empathy and kindness that perhaps could be studied a little bit more, and that's by lay people and not just obviously by the scientific communities globally. Modern science, Western science, whatever the phrase you want to use for it. There's vast amounts of studies, there's vast amounts of statistics, there's vast amounts of cited research papers out there. And what we need to do is come back from all this scientific research, come back to the heartfelt level and say, this is something very profound, and we should really appreciate those individuals who have autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions in reference to how they view and treat animals, whether that's birds or mammals or both. Obviously, that's going to include, in a household setting, felines and canines, or some other household pet that is kept by the parents. So I think I've given enough information in this talk. I didn't want to make it too complex or too intricate. Try to get that balance there between the simplicity and the complexity of the information. I hope you've enjoyed watching the information I've presented. I have certainly enjoyed presenting it to you. There'll be many more videos to be presented to you in the near future. And on that note, I'd like to say take care, everybody, and goodbye.